All right, guys, welcome back to the Fitness and Philosophy podcast. My name is Robbie Gustin, and I'm joined as always by James FitzGerald.
Hey there, everyone. Hi,
James,
fans, subscribers, people who like us.
hello out there in Fitness and Philosophy land.
Hello there.
What you got in that cup?
Good old mountain valley spring water.
That's interesting that you say that. That's actually what
Mountain valley spring water.
I did like a 2 or 3 month, just because I nerd out on this stuff and FDN and what have you, but I did like a 2 month deep dive on like water and filters and what should I get, and like that's what I actually get at home. Like I just get the Mountain Valley Spring.
Nice. I also have I forget every time, but we have a home water system that we got set up, some expensive unit that kind of meets the water coming into our home and does all this fascinating stuff with it, and then puts it through nice channels into our faucets and stuff we wash with and etc. We did that work many years ago. It was well worth it. I don't know if it's not going to give me a third or a third pinky, but it's all good.
You know? Himalayan monks bless the water as it comes into your home, and
That's your other option. That's your other option. Otherwise, you could look at objective measures of actually retesting it once it comes out of the tap and go, none of that shit's in it. It's probably working, which we had done. And
yeah, that
it's
totally
good.
makes sense. Um, my question for today, James, is what is your favorite absolute strength movement?
I'd say deadlift for sure. Yeah, because my long femurs, relatively bigger fingers and hands for the size of my wrist and body, longer arms. Not huge ape index, but an ape index that's over my height. Um, Probably postural endurance activities, like skating and running lead to that. Yeah, and I guess just some, there's probably in those areas of um, my journeys of real deep intensity. It's the highest absolute load number of a movement you're going to lift. So, you know, I can replay how the 315-pound deadlifts felt at the games in 2010. I could replay the 275 repeat deadlift burpee at the 2008 competition in Aromas. I could replay what 475 and just missing 495 felt like as a 40-year-old master at 165, 67 pounds body weight. I could replay all of those things, but I can't replay all the big squat moments as carefully. So that's why I think for me, it's the best one. Thanks for asking. How about yourself?
Uh, it's definitely rotated for me. I mean, I would say from high school up until I started kind of moving into more of the CrossFit world 10 or 11 years ago, I did a lot of bodybuilding stuff. So bench obviously was a big one. And then it transitioned to deadlift for a long time. And I'd say that's still a big one. And then the one I feel the most confident in now is probably the squat, but it's definitely rotated. Definitely rotated.
Okay.
I like them on all different regards.
Yeah.
But yeah, squat probably right now.
Yeah, I love dumbbell press as well as rows as well. Dumbbell rows, single arm rows. Um, yeah, I always like those as well. Um, yeah, if we went on with this, I'd go on and on, probably end up being like, you know what? I just love resistance of all kinds.
Yeah, it's just
you know?
fun.
But yeah, it is it's easy for me immediately to pick the deadlift or the bending pattern. It's
Yeah.
I just did it this morning. This is something that in my repertoire of training. of interest, what I've been doing for the past couple of years now is just doing only pronated grip, true grip deadlifting of multiple sizes of bars.
Hmm.
A beater bar, 35-pound, 45-pound axle bar, but all with this grip. And I've been tying in some good, longevity pieces for me of connecting the whole chain from grip all the way to the load that I could lift. Cause I've accommodated, just think of it, how much my hips and low back could lift my whole life with a mixed grip or mixed hook grip or straps, right?
Right.
And of course, the further and further you go down there towards competition and high repetition and high load, you get some compensations based upon that, right? So I've been reverting back to the pronated position, and it's been good. I pulled 400 for a couple of reps, 3 to 5 reps, I think, for a number of sets this summer with that. And
Wow.
that was a great accomplishment. I felt really strong. And the reason why it's that is that's all the weights I have in my gym. It goes up to like 407 or something, or 406. That's all I have there. So my goal was to get there and do some reps of it. And anyways, it's been a cool journey of going back that way as opposed to what I had learned previously through West Side and Ripito and just classic concepts of powerlifting.
Yeah, that's always impressive to me. I mean, if someone's able to, I mean, just general double overhand, but I mean, even more impressive if they're able to double overhand, no hook grip. That's definitely impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's been good learning. It's been good learning. There's a lot of ego learning inside there too, because
Right.
as I was building up to 355, 370, I'd do a double or triple, and I couldn't hang on to the bar. But my brain, you can imagine, for 10,000 reps was always like, what is this? So it's a bit of an ego shift where the rest of your body's like, just lift it up and stand up, but your grip is like, this, you're not going to hang on to that. So.
Yeah, I think that's something I'd definitely like to retrain in the future at some point. I think like my double overhand non-hook grip
Yeah.
taps out at around 315. I just, past that, I'll switch or something like that. But it would be cool to be able to go
Get
past
into
that.
rock climbing, Robbie. That's what helped me as well. I've been rock climbing with my
Yeah.
daughter, and there's this, different stuff, variation of grip holds and gripping scenarios that you're doing in that. I've had other people who are clients and coaches recommend too that as they started their journey towards jujitsu or practicing those things, they also improved their grip based upon that. So something to think about.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
See you climbing rocks.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. Powerlifter body slash generally immobile. But yeah, I gotta work on that dexterity there. But I've done it a couple times before. It's pretty fun.
You'll be like, can't I just move it? Can
Yeah, can I just push it
I just
somewhere?
push the rock somewhere as
Yeah.
opposed to climb it?
All
All
right,
right,
ready to talk
pleasure.
about some pleasure?
Some pleasure. Yes, I'm excited about that. I did a very small review, but I I'm well aware of what we're going to get into here.
Whether I'll do it or not, I don't know, but I'm sure I could come up with many clickbaity titles for the
Oh
marketing
yeah.
for
Oh
for
yes.
this one.
This is one of them.
Yep. So our new couplet, we did value and impact last time, and that was our previous couplet, and now we're doing pleasure and pain, which will tie in uh, a bit to both value and impact, just insofar as we've been talking about utilitarianism
Yeah.
and pleasure being the highest good and happiness and things like that. So we're going to start out by discussing pleasure, and then next time we will do pain. So let's start off with the dictionary definition of pleasure. And as you might imagine, I remember reading, where was I reading this? It was like in a ND philosophy magazine or something like that. But basically, they were talking about how, the Greeks had 7 different terms for love. there's like erotic love, there's love
Okay.
between you and your family, there's love between you and your friends, love for ideas. So I'm
Oh yeah.
just mentioning that here because when we hear these different definitions of pleasure, you kind of recognize like, oh, this is
Yeah.
not picking out like one single thing. These are many different phenomena, which of course we'll get into. So pleasure can mean desire and inclination. It could mean a state of gratification, sensual gratification, in particular, frivolous amusement, a source of delight or joy. Now, of course, those are all, they've got like they're related, but they're different, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So so there are a number of philosophical considerations that we can bring up with regard to pleasure that I think will be important in discussing its relation to fitness. So the first question we always ask with these concepts is like, what kind of a thing is the thing? What kind of a thing is value? What kind of thing is autonomy? What kind of thing is pleasure? So without taking us too deep down the philosophical rabbit hole, we can say pretty straightforwardly that pleasure is a feeling. Um, it's not an object, it's not a person, it's a feeling. And in particular, it seems to be a biological entity. Now, there are debates about this in philosophy, whether machines could ever have pleasure or whether objects are capable of pleasure. But again, going back to like that burden of proof that we've discussed so much before, that's so important in these conversations. Like, I'm not dogmatically asserting that pleasure is biological. I'm just saying, hey, what we have experience of is pleasure being biological. If someone wants to show that objects or machines can experience pleasure, the burden is on them to show that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's been so much now more recently in genetic noticings of people that have a scalar variances in terms of what they have as that outcome of dopamine and serotonin changes, or also neural changes that are seen at the brain. Then, if they're describing it in language as pleasure or less pleasurable, then you can see how there's more and more evidence over time which will tie in that this feeling is, is a matter, is a concept of, it's a matter, it's matter, and we can like look at it and see where it comes from and how it's derived, and why some humans have more options of going after it right away. Some humans are not oblivious, but at a lower level, capable of, experiencing it, etc.
Yeah, and for a very long time in both the history of philosophy and religion, pleasure was thought of as a mental entity, where
Mhm.
for Descartes and others, mind was something distinct from body. And there's still debates and discussions about that. But whatever else we want to say, like even the most well, maybe the most hardened dualist about mind and body may not agree, but like most people to this debate will agree that it has some relation to biology, neurotransmitters, chemicals in the brain, so on and so forth. And then there's, related to the point you just brought up, there's the subjective aspect, which, with our current technology, we never have access to what anyone else is experiencing. That's another famous philosophical problem.
Yeah.
But on the objective side, you could have two people with, one has a super high level of dopamine and one has a super low level in response to a different stimulus, but they're both experiencing the same amount of pleasure. And that
Hmm.
has to do with, receptor sensitivity and, genetic SNPs and things of that nature.
Yeah, and their environment, and they're learning about that and perceptions. Yeah.
Right. So, why is it that a whole slew of people can drink alcohol and not become alcoholics, and yet there's some people who family history and things like that triggers that right for them, and it's almost too much to
Yes.
handle
Yes.
type of thing.
Yep. Great example.
So, pleasure is a mental or neurological entity that, so far as we know, exists in the brains of beings that have sufficient neurological capacity to experience it. And in the animal ethics debate, vegan vegetarianism, this is of course like a question that comes up with relation to, do scallops experience pleasure? Like what's the cutoff of neurological activity
Yes.
such that they are worthy of moral concern? So it's an interesting question, like how robust does a biological entity's neurological capacity need to be to experience pleasure or pain?
Yeah. Or the
Um,
birds and worms and stuff that get caught up in all the edamame fields and grain fields, and all the animals that allow people to eat grains and non-meat, what kind of animals feel pain in the opportunity of making all that happen? That's where it gets a little wonky too in the conversation.
Yeah, that is where it gets a little problematic, and then there's the whole issue of
A deer feeling pain being eaten by a bear, in the woods. Um,
or insects. There's not much of a vegan movement for crickets
it's
or what have you. Now, and I mean, this I think is actually a super interesting topic, and
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I
I didn't
don't
mean
want
to
to
drown
discuss
it,
this.
but I'm just saying
Oh
it's
no, no, you're fine. But yeah, I mean, it really is a interesting question, and there's been research around, you know, plants have, certain networks of communication, and they don't want to be eaten either. But of course, what's the relevant sense of want and pleasure and pain? And
Mhm.
yeah. So anyway, just to say that it's an interesting question about like what's the threshold
Yeah,
there.
for sure.
Um, and then, you know, this other point, there's nothing intrinsically pleasurable about, eating food, having sex, working out, except with relation to those neurochemicals, those activities released. And that's where you get, these famous philosophical examples of the Matrix and others where, if you could reproduce those same neurochemical firings in the brain, but without having the actual objects or events taking place, could you, in effect, stimulate reality?
Mm.
So it's just to say that a lot of what we feel with regard to pleasure and or pain isn't inherent in the object per se, although there is a relation, but it has a lot to do with kind of how our brain responds to different scenarios.
Hmm. Yep. Um, are you saying inside of that it takes like someone to converse about it, or someone tell someone about their initial orgasm as to what that will feel like in terms of it being pleasurable, or it just happens and they don't know if it is pleasure? They can't classify it as that.
Good question. I'm going to use that as the title for this for this
There we
episode.
go. There it is.
Marketing. You have to be told about your orgasm to market. Yeah, to know its pleasure. I would definitely not assent to option number one. Like, I don't think someone needs to be told that to understand that it's pleasurable. I guess what I'm saying is that you could have the very same act, whether it's eating or having sex or, engaging in a fitness activity, and yet something's gone wonky about your neurochemicals.
Mm,
And, that association between the joy or the pleasure inherent in it goes away. And I mean, that happens in cases of depression and,
yeah, yeah.
people getting TBIs and things like that. So it's just to say that those activities, biologically speaking, and we'll talk about this later, from an evolutionary perspective, are meant to give rise to certain pleasures in us. But the only way they're able to do that is if there's sufficient apparatus and capacity up here to
Yes,
receive that.
got it. Yeah.
And then one other thing that I didn't have in the outline, but I just thought of in the couple days since I sent it, and I know you've read Chalmers before, but just a note for our listeners. In the discussion around consciousness in philosophy, there's what David Chalmers has referred to as the hard problem of consciousness, which is the question of why are there qualia at all? And for those who've never heard the term, it just means, why does it feel like anything to drink water? Why does it feel like anything to hold a snowball? Why does it feel like anything to eat food or have sex or, engage in fitness activities? Humans could get along from a evolutionary and survival of the fittest perspective without having those qualia going along for the ride.
Mhm.
Presumably, that's the argument. At least we
Yeah.
could, survive, reproduce, eat food, but without having like feeling behind it. So it's an interesting question philosophically, like, where does this come from? And as we've discussed before with Nagel and the Mary experiment and what is it like to be a bat, you could have the ultimate scientific explanation of the brain and the body and how that all works, and yet have no idea qualitatively what it's like to have an orgasm or
Mhm.
see colors
Mhm.
or, different things like that.
Yeah.
So,
The selfish gene goes into that as well, or Dawkins' writings on that in a little bit more of a trying to gain, I think maybe like more of an evolutionary idea of where these how these things may have arisen over a really long period of time, to give us a little bit more insight into the possible whys of why we possibly feel that and why it could still be necessary to continue to do what we continue to do. Also, I think about some of the things that have been learned from many years ago, of communication between other individuals, and then how we act around one another, and how we've built kind of this, base support of working together with other individuals. And there is some things that were observed in that working together with other individuals that we recognize. It's like, oh, we gathered food together and it led to this. That's a great learning, as simple as it sounds, between two individuals that can, wherever it comes from, led to this opportunity to go, oh, that leads to this. So of course you could say, well, that's okay, that's great, that led to reproduction and survival for that particular tribe, et cetera, et cetera. But then, along the lines, there was some base support of a recognition of this. And so, I guess that's where the question may be: was there something around the feeling that was involved in that tribe and community and et cetera that led to those things, where they were like, oh, and does that build the basis of things like empathy and et cetera, that were common knowledge, I would argue, for maybe hundreds of thousands of years, just didn't have language for them. That's where my brain goes in terms of like how we got to that point of possibly, where did these things, do we need to have those things arise for us to have any purpose or reason?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, for me personally, and I know there are counter arguments to this. I mean, I do think quality of play a functional role. I mean, they do, as we're about to talk about, they play a motivating role. They do make it more likely that we seek out certain things. Now that can go awry, of course, but they are motivating forces. And then a question that I thought of as you were saying that I think is also interesting is, to what extent does pleasure arise in us for things that have nothing to do with survival and reproduction?
Yeah. Yeah.
Things that are maybe once were related to survival and reproduction, but have
Mhm.
kind of branched off now. And
Yes. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
reading a book
Good
has
question.
reading a book has very little to do with, I mean, one could make the argument, of course, that like, yes, it upgrades your knowledge and you can do better things and potentially earn more money, but there's lots of reading of books that has nothing to do with survival or reproduction, and yet that generates pleasure. So, what do we say there?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, I don't know, and it's a great question, but I can tell you, I can just answer it point blank in terms of it. Is that for my particular self, in my essence, and however that came to be, I like just learning things and doing nothing with it, but just knowing that I did learn that interesting thing. So it's pleasurable, I would guess you would say, just to myself. There's some form of pleasure inside of just the gaining of that kind of interesting aha moment, like I don't know. More recently, I just looked down at a book I'm reading on the politics industry, by Michael Porter and Catherine Gell, and just unfolding a whole bunch of things that me, for my mind and my capabilities, around little bits of the background of how politics works in America, and to me that just like, cards start to fall in a whole bunch of other scenarios, right? I recall 45 things right away after one page that was like, oh man, that totally explained all that. You see what I'm saying? But until now, this moment, I never spoke about that exactual pleasure that I just gained, if I'm saying, if I'm meaning anything there. So, um, anyways, I just wanted to give an N equals one of where the pleasure I would gain from that knowledge. And I may not do anything with it, but I certainly get a couple of smiles on myself from it. Like, wow, it's kind of cool.
No, and that's a good example of the idea that like, gaining knowledge through reading a book can be intrinsically pleasurable, but without leading to any sort of, you know, benefit in survival and reproduction in the world. And just
Yes.
that notion that like, a lot of the things we ultimately, I mean, not everything, but a lot of things we ultimately pursue, we're seeking that intrinsic,
Yeah.
happiness or
Yeah.
pleasure. We're not trying to do it to get something else. So it's just an
Yeah. Where
interesting
is it? Where
question.
is it? Where is
Yeah.
it? Here it comes. Here it comes. Take a picture. Instagram. I learned this. Highlight this. You guys should all do this. Yeah. Doesn't always lead to that.
No, definitely not. Um, so another thing that we've been talking about that I think is relevant to what we're going to get to when we get to pleasure and fitness is one might say that pleasure is not just a motivating force, but potentially the motivating force. So, from a purely descriptive perspective, when we're talking about just how people actually act, it's certainly the case that it is a primary motivating force and potentially the motivating force. And then the normative question there is, well, should that be the case? Should it be the case that pleasure is, what motivates us? And that gets into
I guess it's how we define pleasure.
right, which gets into the next point, which is super important. And this notion of pleasure versus happiness. And we talked about this a little bit with relation to utilitarianism. Almost every wisdom, philosophical, religious tradition throughout history has made roughly the same distinction or a similar distinction between at least two different types of pleasure. So one type of pleasure is pleasure where we define it as desire satisfaction. This is associated with being temporary. It's fleeting. This is dopamine. We always need more. You develop a tolerance for the thing you liked, and now you need more of it. It leads to an emptiness and a void that can't be filled. So, think of sex or drugs or, again, certain types and things like that. But think of things that are inherently addictive. This type of pleasure tends to conflict with happiness and fulfillment. The two diverge.
Mhm.
And then, hedonism is usually associated with it, like, money, sex, cars, fame, power. You were asking last time why I always use cars. I think I was thinking about that more. I think maybe because I grew up in Southern California and we're such a car culture. That could be the
Cool.
reason.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Awesome.
um,
No, and listen, I didn't. I would love a car show, a show where we just talked about that and connected all things fitness to cars. Maybe that's a
that would be kind of cool.
we'll we'll get into. We can have
But any,
categories of different kinds of essences of cars and like classify them, and yeah, lots can go there.
yeah, any thoughts on that first type of pleasure?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm thinking about it the right way based on what you're saying, because I was just writing some things down as and maybe jumping ahead, but I wrote down how to view pleasure right away as we start that process of seeing what pleasure means and what kind of pleasure in terms of fitness. Um, I wrote down that maybe we should view it as trying to come up with ideas that get us to how people can perceive where pleasure fits into fitness. So, of course, after we've defined what it is, then we can get on with, saying things like, you should try to find pleasure and consistency in your fitness program, and not try to find pleasure in the dose response of each particular workout. And then it allows us then to say, well, ask more questions. Why are you feeling like you need to have pleasure from your fitness experience? And then we don't need to judge whether it's right or wrong, because there still could be, you doing deadlifting and leads to utility for a long period of time. And you could still say, well, I had pleasure in that particular session, but we could at least back up and say, but what was your intentions going into it? Are you doing it to get pleasure from the session? Or are you doing it at a macro level? So over time, you're getting pleasure from the consistency of being inside there. So that's just what I was thinking about as you were mentioning the kind of pleasure.
Yeah, and that makes sense, and I think that gets us into that second type of pleasure, this notion of happiness. This is usually associated, Aristotle defined this as eudaimonia. That was the Greek word for it. The idea that there is being longer lasting, leads to deeper meaning, purpose, fulfillment, satisfaction, not needing more, not always needing that, like that little push of the button,
Hmm.
and not associated with hedonism or desire satisfaction. So we'll obviously get to this, or maybe we could, talk about it now, but in terms we've talked about before, just from a biological perspective, not for everyone, of course, but sustainable resistance training and sustainable aerobic training lends itself more towards like, patience, temperance, like long-term satisfaction. It doesn't quite have that like high jolt of like, ooh, the dopamine. So you're trading off that like immediate desire satisfaction for the other stuff, and then of course the shitty shit and the okay, let's do this and this station and that station, the next station. Like you get way more of a spike there in that
Mhm.
desire satisfaction,
Yeah,
but then you on the back end you lose out on this fulfillment. You're
yeah,
always searching for that next thing.
yeah, yeah. Which, as you're saying it, isn't it? I'm not sure if it's the first time we thought about that, but isn't that like just life today in the internet? Isn't that a reflection of what's inside of fitness? It's like da da da, da da da,
Yeah.
and it's we're well accepting is like, listen, that's life. Let's have it inside of fitness. Anyways, that's what I thought about there. But I don't see. Yeah, I don't. I Yeah, how to land on that because it's something that we've spoke of. We kind of understand it. We get it, right? Don't always be going after that one thing. And if you pace it out and you go long term and you think long term, it's better, sweet on the other side. And we define that based upon this long term. But I think maybe planting this idea that you actually have a burden and less freedom when your intentions are pleasurable that leads towards hedonistic stuff inside the process, right? Like if you're going for that hit all the time, and this is just another way of saying what I said 1,000 times over, but if you're going after that each time, you are a slave to that, and that's not freedom, right? So that is I don't know if you're pulling anything from that, but that's leading you, right? Like, that's becoming something that is erring on the side, which I know we're going to get to in the wording, but the addiction of it to go after it that actually can't be fulfilled or like filled anymore to allow you to be able to do it, because this thing that you go after, you have to have the resources necessary repetitively to go after and get that thing, right? So you waste all your resources chasing that thing. And then the only way to keep getting that pleasurable dose eventually yields and gets less and less of a chance of doing it. So I just said what I've said 1,000 times before in a different way, but I just wanted to hit on the point that that hedonistic journey leads to you being a slave to that and not freedom.
Oh
Um,
yeah. And yeah, I mean
which
it
seems
seems.
pleasurable the whole time, right? It's like hit, 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 not H, hit, hit, HIIT, it. I got to extend out the middle vowel every time when I try to embed that, or should come up on my screen every time I say it.
No, I agree, and that I think it's a good point. That's one of those things where it seems like it's freedom. It seems like it's freedom insofar as you're like, oh, I'm
Yeah,
I'm pursuing what I want to pursue.
yeah.
Again, whether it's sex or money or your particular workout, it's like, oh, no one's constraining me.
No, my
So,
choice.
yeah, so I
My
get to
choice
do.
of doing this.
Yeah, exactly. I get to do what I want. But I mean, many philosophers, but just two that come to mind, Kant and Rousseau were famous for saying, um, true freedom comes from some sort of constraint or law or self governance of
Mm,
oneself. If you don't have that, then it really just is a free-for-all where you're a slave to whatever it is that you're chasing. And again, it need not necessarily be fitness. Like, most traditions have noticed this. Talk about financials, it's the exact same thing.
yeah,
Don't invest in the cool hot stock.
yeah.
Index funds and relationships, it's the same,
Mhm.
over and over and over again. It's the same, generally um the same point. But yeah, in the fitness realm today especially, it's really kind of, people use it as that means of, it's just another way to get that little
Yeah,
button press.
yeah. And where does the responsibility lie? I guess in that, that's another thing we can discuss is I think there's bad players and bad actors out there in the coaching area that would not be well intentioned, but they'd be unconscious and incompetent, and I would still classify them as bad actors in pushing that whole narrative of hedonism and pleasure and just go after it, hit and hit, over and over. Um, and I think then you could say, well, how do we get to the point to your philosophical definition of the awareness of self governance? Like, you know, do we just leave it in the hands of people just to go out there and figure it out? And be like, oh, that's pleasurable. But this whole concept of like, well, I would assume it's got to be like just a small amount of pleasure, the right amount of pleasure that leads to long-term things. And I don't think, to be honest, there's a whole lot of people who have that the cognitive ability to understand that. So I'm just trying to find a place, whether it's worth it or not. You can stop it if you need to, but in terms of responsibility for that awareness of that.
No, I mean, honestly, I think that's one of the most interesting discussions we can have. And I mean, I talk about this with Brandon all the time with regard to, ethical marketing and just, on the one hand, people want what they want. And if you beat them over the head with, well, you shouldn't want that. Well, fuck, that's what I want. You know what I mean? Like, we aren't necessarily, as we've discussed before, we aren't in voluntary control of our wants.
Mm-hmm.
Our wants can change over time due to new experiences and new perspectives, but they aren't immediately in our voluntary control. So if you're sitting there, wanting the shitty shit, and someone says, well, that's stupid to want that. Well, that's not going to change tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think in my perspective, and I'd be interested to hear yours as well, it's a 50-50 thing. The coach cannot change that for the client by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
The client could maybe do it by themselves, but it's a team effort. And if the client doesn't come to the table willing to be open to new perspectives and ideas, there's nothing the coach is going to say that's going to make a difference.
Yeah. No, that's why I wanted to talk on the responsibility aspect, because it comes down to ethics of, if you're aware of that and you're aware, and if you just continue to allow a place for people just to go after the pleasure, then I want to make mention of the fact that I recognize that you are at fault for a tremendous amount of problems that are going to come up down the road, right? That's your issue as a coach. That's your problem. That's your fault. And so I think, to be, brunt on it, I think that's why I want to discuss it, is to talk about, okay, so you have that in place and we're all aware of it. Then, what's the starting point on the nudges then of the conversation of like, yeah, I know you want that, and I know why you want that is what's going to eventually get in here. So I'm going to market that so that you do come in. And then when you do come in, then what are we going to do? Are you going to constantly be like, oh yeah, you can get what you want, and that's where I think there has to be something to be said, to your point, and you used it, and that's why I was discussing it on marketing and then getting clients in, is just, let's just all be okay with the fact of recognizing that it's going to take a teamwork approach to get that each individual person recognizing their intentions of the exercise session, right? And let's be all okay if you figure out that 90% of all of them, in a generalized term, are doing it for pleasure. Oh, okay, fucking, that's fine, but don't stop there, is what we're saying, or what I'm saying. Don't stop there. Move it a little bit further into like, what's going to happen in 2 years when you don't get the pleasure anymore, or it's at a different rate, you don't have the resources necessary to get the pleasure, like, and I think this brings us back to our consistent big problem in fitness is, it takes a lifetime to mess people up, right? And humans are resilient and adaptive, and we probably won't get to that big impactful change in a short period of time.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think there are better and worse ways to do it. I think I mean, OPEX does a good job of marketing. OPEX gyms generally do. Like, where you're still discussing things in terms of let's be honest. Most people in our culture today, for better or worse, are interested in losing weight.
Hmm.
Okay. Should that be the main thing that we're all concerned with? Probably not. We should probably be concerned with health and longevity, but that is the main thing.
Hmm.
So you can, start with that as a question or a tagline of, hey, want to do this? But then be honest about, hey, this is going to take, months and years, and we need good food quality and good habits and all the rest of that stuff instead of, the 30-day macro template or what have you. So I think ethically there, to even get people to listen in the first place, you have to talk about what are they even interested in. But then you have to also be honest about, what it is that they really need to get there. Um, you can't feed them a line about, well, you're going to get this in 30 days or what have you. So I think it's a very good question.
Yep. And it's another one, it's just important, even at this point in time, to recognize that the concept of pleasure as an intention is very similar to all the other, let's call them incorrect intentions that people are realistically thinking as a part of the fitness landscape. And we're all just knowing that we as coaches are over here and we're really far away from talking the same talk, right? On what we believe in and what we think is best and where they actually think reality is for fitness, right? So if you think like, oh, we'll just start here, well, that's a good, but just recognize you were like 8 steps away from getting them to the point of like, you know, I move because I can and I move for me.
Right.
That's really far.
Yeah, no, that's totally understandable. But then the immediate question is, well, what's the other option? Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
Yeah.
if we beat them over the head with, hey, you're wrong and your wants are dumb, like,
Well, I've given you the option. We've talked about it, right? Wake up in the morning, the sound goes off in all the communities, and people start doing the FitzGerald jumping jacks and all the calisthenics and do some resistance and walk for 10K. And I've told you, this is what has to happen, right? And you got to do it. You got to
yeah.
do it. Why? Because the music was played, right? Da, 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 this is what you do. Fitness is like breakfast.
OPEC's North Korea is not yet a license. We can we can make it one. Try this experiment. Get one of the Kim Jongs to, do CCP and
Oh man.
we'll run a big experiment.
Well, everyone's listening in, so I'll let you know if someone comes through. It's like, I'm interested in your concept.
Oh man.
I don't know why I sound like a big conch, but it's like the Barkley Marathon conch. I would borrow that every day.
Or the like the remember when I visited Egypt at one, like the call to prayer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's like, and then no one blinks. It's like, this is what we do.
Yeah.
Shut up. Just do it. Why? Don't ask that. Just do it.
But then have we circled back with like no autonomy, right? Do you know what I mean? Have we just collapsed in on ourselves? Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. All the heat. Yeah. Well, on a more serious note, though, maybe it can bring us back to the center. It should make sense that there's like sugar and orgasm and um, sometimes sugar and orgasm. Um, there's some there's some good feelings inside of the fitness experience, right? Of this, there's something there, right? And so it should make sense that depending upon how humans perceive that physical challenge and what's in place, right? It should make sense to us that you could wrap your entire existence around that, right? Like, I like that. I like it so much. I want it. I want it so much. I want to tell everyone about it. And I just want to like wrap it around me and like, so it should make sense. That shouldn't be surprising. I think that's what I'm picking up too, is just got to find the right balance in that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. One example that I think we've mentioned before that, man, I'd like to do an episode on that. I don't, have you ever heard of the philosopher Alistair McIntyre?
Yes, I took one of his quotes on the body and physiology and posted on Facebook a while back.
Okay. So he's a famous, probably one of the more famous philosophers of the 20th century, moral philosophy. Wrote a book called After Virtue, philosopher here at Notre Dame. Anyway, um, a lot of what he says actually overlaps in some interesting ways with what you have to say about, so his whole thesis is like ethics just went way off the rails with like utilitarianism and other theories kind of in modernity, and we got to go back to Aristotle and virtue ethics from kind of the early days of humanity and things like that. But one of the interesting ideas that he has in his book is the notion of um, whatever endeavor someone engages in their life, whether it's sports or music or academia or what have you. It's this notion of a practice where um, initially you have to take your licks and learn that you're eager to want to do the cool thing that Mozart's doing and Beethoven's doing and all those different things, but then you learn over time. Now this takes time, lots of time and practice. And he has this cool analogy of you know the grandpa playing chess with his grandson, where initially the grandpa gives the grandson some candy to play chess with him, and that's the first few sessions. I don't
Hmm.
know, 10 sessions or whatever. And then eventually the kid just wants to play because he realizes the intrinsic values in the practice. And
Hmm.
I often wonder, in relation to our conversation we just had about um, ethical marketing and
Yeah.
speaking to fitness clients and stuff like that, does that ever apply to fitness clients and adults?
No.
Now, well, it's funny that you say that, because I've just been marketing for dogmatism and fitness, and one of the video quotes I put up was you saying, "Be a fucking adult." Like, we're not gonna treat adults like kids. The reason we say don't cross the road and we yell it to our kids and don't give them reasons is because they don't have the capacity to understand. And um, I don't know. I'm not. I see the desire not to want to treat adults like that, and I wish that were the case, but I I I don't know. To me, it really does depend on the context, and I'd be happy to have that discussion. But
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I
I think there's too many things that get piled on inside the fitness experience that people just can't like. Yeah, it doesn't. An analogy, I don't know. It just doesn't. It doesn't actually like create more guardrails and kind of put people into this better balanced way of like, ooh, aha moment learning. I'm becoming more aware, more aware, more aware. Ooh, to the good spot. Which doesn't happen because there's just so much other shit that comes with the things that they get inside that fitness experience, that if it's not partnered up with a coach who's like, meeting them every couple of days, like, yes, did you see that? Did you see that? Okay, well, back off, back off. Okay, get out there. That's not the way it's occurring, right? We think it occurs like the way I'd say it likes to occur, but it's not. So what do you have? You have in two small areas. You have a personal trainer who wants them to come back and not get anything from the awareness because they need to keep them, and then you have a group coach who doesn't have the opportunity to have the feedback loop to kind of like get them in the right direction to more awareness and aha. So I don't think it does happen where where, if I correct me if I'm wrong in what you were thinking there, but on the marketing aspect, you just know that's the case, and then you bring them in and you recognize the candy, and you're like, candy, 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 less candy, and no candy, and over time they're like, oh wow, there's no candy. Somehow I got to the point where I see the deepest intentions inside a fitness experience. It's not going to occur. It's not going to occur because of all the other things that just get piled on top of it for fitness that can't allow them to kind of figure things out. Then there's the odd case, right? There's a coach who takes the extra step, or does that feedback loop, or recognizes the incorrect intentions and recognizes pleasure seeking, and kind of just like slowly moves them through it. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I guess it depends on I mean, I guess it depends all on what candy is in this metaphor, right? Is it
Hmm. Yeah.
the marketing where you're speaking to them in the terms that they understand and the questions that they're asking and meeting them where they're at, or is it candy in the sense of like, a Metcon, the shitty shit. On one, definition, one's less nefarious than the other, but
Hmm.
um,
Well, I think that, yeah, that's a good question to ask. But let's just say that it was only about the candy of a lack of awareness. So, so the marketing that leads to that we're, the way I describe it, it's all unconscious and no one cares, but let's just come on in here. And so they come in here. If in that case scenario, I think it does then you ask the question, well, are there other candies or things on the other side? And my point is, it doesn't matter because already their expectations are off, the alignment is off, their every thought process, everything they think they're supposed to get from every session, how quickly they're going to advance. Like all these things are already all messed up, right? And so now they're scoring like what we would call 1 out of 10 on fitness intelligence. And you're thinking over time, not you, but people are thinking over time, it's gonna just grow, Um, that's what I was thinking in terms of trying to define what the candy is, in specifics.
yeah,
And
that makes sense.
and then you could get the other case where I know that has occurred, right? To myself and others, they actually come in with intentions of, just being like, hey, I just want to understand this thing with more of a, let's call it classic terminology. I just didn't exercise as much, haven't taken time for myself. Kids are out of the house, and I just want to get a little stronger and just support this thing for the rest of my life. And that's where they stop, right? And then they start doing the fitness experience with a more of an unconscious prescription that I have done in years past, as well as what I would see. And the client starts attaching to the short term, like, thing. And so they're getting something. And that was a Metcon or that was a physiological dose of something that they're now attaching some pleasure to. So you can see it even happened on the back end, but it led to, so it doesn't always occur that way where it's unconscious and they come in and etc. It's just there's just so many things inside the fitness experience, that's what I said, that just leads people off to trying to go after that very fast adaptation. um, Possibly, dare I say, because it's human. We want to quickly adapt and quickly overcome these challenges that are in front of us. And that's why I always say that for today's crop of individuals who understand the internet, the expectations are really whacked out of line because you're made to believe that you can get stuff very quickly, right? And so now we have this now we have this big differential in what is reality and what is fantasy for those expectations and progressions.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the question of like, what is the propensity of someone to change their intentions over time? And um, I don't think this issue is unique to fitness. I think it's philosophy,
No.
music, and any endeavor that you pursue. When I first started studying philosophy, I mean, we all want to like, what are the big nuggets? What are the big ideas? Why am I reading, all this different stuff? And then as you do it, your intentions shift and you start to realize the intrinsic value. Not always, of course, but again, going back to McIntyre's notion of a practice where initially we're all gunning for like the results super quick, and the music teacher or the coach or whoever has to say, no, 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 patience, patience, patience. So yeah, yeah, I see what you're saying. I agree with a lot of it. I think the question that,
Institution, yeah, sorry, it's the institution and the systems are not set up, Robbie. And I guess, and this goes back to our conversation on, impact and what's the number and effect size and what we mean by that. But the institutions, the concept is set up, but the institutions and the systems are not set up to support that like slow drip increase awareness over time, where these notions of patience and what I wrote down as deep practice, right? Daniel Coyle calls that in the talent code. Um, because it blends into like my first word, consistency, flow, and getting pleasure around that concept, which I enjoy from the philosopher you're just discussing. That's certainly near and dear to me.
yeah, it's interesting. I think in almost any endeavor you can think of, pleasure almost always starts out as an attempt at desire satisfaction, and then if you stick with it long enough and you learn the ropes and you actually have patience and habits with it, it becomes that, happiness, fulfillment.
Yeah.
But you do have to have, a lot of times the proper guides and the proper intentions and all the rest of the things we've been discussing.
Yeah, what's some of the homework I should have done in this, but I can ask listeners to do this is, which would probably help it, is to write in language a lower order to higher order scale of words that describe different kinds of pleasure, right? So lower order, because you just actually said it, but you just said it in two different areas, right? Beginning and end. And I would say that there is order to that, meaning the higher order version of it, is probably on the far end of what you just said is how we're defining happiness and contentment and etc. And way over here is like that short term, I really like that. And just build out this, terminology that allows you then to create language to help people with that, so that you can say it in different ways and it doesn't hurt them, but you basically make them recognize it's like, listen, you're just starting out, so it does make sense that each session you're like, that should make sense. But let me tell you that we also don't want to lie to you that over time that will diminish in how you're currently perceiving it, right? That will diminish. And instead, the ideas that you have in place of why you're coming in here and what you're doing will be around just getting in here, and then it'll make sense when I make comments like you hear me saying with my workout is like, well, I showed up, and that's the pleasurable moment. Those are pleasurable moments.
Right.
So it's how it's defined. I would agree, but getting there, yeah, you raise a good point. It's we we just know that that's a good challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another philosophical question I thought we could discuss with relation to fitness is the question of, and it kind of goes back to what we were just discussing, but in a different way. It's this question of, does and should pleasure be the motivating force to engage in fitness, or should we engage in fitness just because, for certain reasons of autonomy and virtue, and do it because you can, not
Yeah.
because someone told you to, and do it because it's for you, and then it happens to lead to pleasure. So this
Yeah.
is a debate within moral philosophy between Kant and the utilitarians, even though they existed temporarily very far apart. um, but Kant famously says that pleasure is never the motive should never be the motivating force for moral action. You do the moral action out of respect for the moral law, and if you get some, you know, residual pleasure out of returning a wallet to a police station, cool. But if that's ever your sole reason for doing it without doing it because it's the right thing to do, like, you've totally missed the boat on morality. Like,
Mhm.
something has gone
Mhm.
terribly awry.
Yeah.
And in fact, Kant thinks evil or immorality consists in putting one's personal pleasures or desires over the moral law. That is just what immorality is. Whereas utilitarianism, it's not hedonism, certainly, and we're talking about the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, but it's intrinsically linked to this notion of pleasure. So the question in fitness that I think is particularly interesting is, should we engage in fitness for certain reasons that go beyond pleasure, and then pleasure is just kind of a nice result as a result of consistency, or this was a cool exercise I did, or is pleasure ultimately the motivating force for why we do it in the first place, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it currently is for most people. It's currently a very pleasurable situation, thinking there's going to be some outcomes, right?
Right.
There's lots of argument what those outcomes will be, but I think currently at the time, it's that. um, we also have to take into consideration, people's perceptions, and I think a lot of people do fitness today because they want others to know that they did fitness. So there's pleasure in other people knowing that they were participating, and that just gets wrapped up in, community chatter or whiteboards or online boards or whatever, for all good reasons, right? Just, we're together on this and we're all thing, but it's kind of important that everyone knows that you were participating, and then the market sells the fact all you have to be in our group and in our system and show that you were in there. And I think there's lots of pleasure for a lot of people as that, today, and we sell that. So I think And it seems like anyways, the way I just perceived how you lined that up, it seemed like a more challenging question than what I rely on, over and over. And I do think that, I guess I would take the side of Kant in saying that, if maybe I'm wrong on that, but that, yeah, there's do it because you can, and do it because it's for you. And no one knows about it. I mean, that's how it indicate that the intentions are correct, and you're probably doing it that's going to last for a really long period of time. And nowhere into that I say there's pleasure involved in it, because that's based upon perception. Some people some people may not have any pleasure in physical challenges for their whole life. So the question could remain, well, do they really need to do it if they never find some form of joy in it? I think that's an interesting question, right? There's never any pleasure, and it's always suffering, just to do it every day, and etc. And even to that point, I would argue that at the end of days, I could probably pull out a lot of great principles of 60 years of fucking hate doing that, but at least you were consistent in it. So yeah, I don't know if that's just gook, but that's what I think based upon that.
No, I mean, that's what I would have thought. I mean, you're from what I understand, and you seem to confirm it. Like, yeah, you're definitely more on the side of Kant in this regard,
Okay.
where the idea is that you would do an action for these particular reasons, and if pleasure happens to be an accidental result, whatever, but that is not the primary motivating force
Yes.
behind what you do it. Now, a question that just came up, and you saying that I was wondering about in relation to that point.
Mm-hmm.
You were saying pleasure's not in the statements do it because you can and do it because it's for you. I see how it's not in the do it because you can. What does for you mean in that case if we're not talking about pleasure? Like, let's get a
Yeah.
little deeper on that one.
Yeah. Because you see the benefits that it's providing you by your actions in participating in fitness. And that doesn't mean that it's always going to be, smiley faces, dopamine response on the back end of it, but you're going to start to pick up these little things that come from your experience in fitness that lead to, your awareness of your resilience, your awareness of handling challenging conversations, your awareness of climbing up mountains now you couldn't before, etc. So that's the for you aspect of it. Do it because you'll gain all this knowledge of how much it does for you. And it nowhere, as I said, nowhere in there is the context of, for you such that you recognize, wow, that's pleasurable. Yeah. Now, in language and context, that, like, to me, that is pleasurable,
Right.
meaning, like my book learning, or, let's just think about this. Yeah, my awareness of doing all resistance training and then rock climbing now with my daughter, recognizing, man, I'm glad I did all that upper body strength work. Do you know what I mean? That was pleasurable for me, that awareness of that context, right? So again, I'm not going to say it's all about how you're speaking of pleasure on that back end of it,
Right. Yeah.
but I'm saying it's the recognition of all the things you gain from the fitness experience that you go, wow, that's it's building this, it's making this better, and my buffer's bigger, and etc. So you're doing it for you.
Yeah. And some of those intrinsic values that we've talked about before, like
Yes.
autonomy and virtue and
Yeah.
things like that. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Kant has a famous example of it's a guy who he refers to at the friend as the friend of humanity, and the idea is imagine someone who's genetically born. Most of us are not. I mean, just as a matter of course, like
Yeah.
you know, genetically born to always want to do the moral thing, right? Morality is hard
Yeah.
precisely because what we want to do pulls in the other direction, and pleasure pulls in the other direction. But he says, imagine someone who's born constitutionally such that they always want to give to charity and never want to steal, and he says, he asks this question, is this person a moral being? And he famously says no, um, which grates a lot of people's intuitions. But what he's saying there is that you can't just do it because it's like your default state of what makes you happy. You have to do it for deeper, more intrinsic reasons. You have to do it because of the respect for the moral law. If his brain was wired differently and he was like, nope, not going to act moral anymore, that's not morality anymore. Like, it
Mhm.
needs to be those deeper
Yeah.
reasons. And then it's kind of an interesting connection to what you're saying about, like, it can't just be for the base level, pleasures and dopamine. It has to be for these kind of deeper reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounded to me in my, uh, like, uh, a choice and then action on that choice and then your recognition of the choice and the action, right? As opposed to just like asking, well, did you do that to get pleasure? Like, I don't know, what did I do? And I could see how he's classifying that as immoral.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is, that's a good one. That's a good stretch.
So one other one I thought we could talk about that, obviously you guys have brought up a lot in OPEX is the connection between fitness, pleasure, and evolution. This idea
Mm.
of happy, hungry, and horny. Um, it would seem in a lot of ways that we're biologically hardwired to derive pleasure and perhaps happiness from certain activities. Yes, there are unique individual differences, but boy, across cultures, people generally like to walk. They like to eat. You know what I mean? There
Hmm.
are these things, and pleasure seems to be the motivating um, force there. So, yeah, I just thought it'd be interesting to discuss the extent to which fitness is one among those things that we're biologically hardwired to do, and how it connects to being happy, horny, and hungry.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a, I don't know. Maybe it's for another time. We could discuss a fourth or fifth or maybe sixth H and go meta on this motherfucker. But healthy fits in here at the end too as a nice H. So happy, horny, healthy, hungry. Happy, horny, hungry, healthy. No particular order. No
Yeah.
particular order, folks. Come on. Um, but we've refined that over time. Obviously, I love alliteration, and it gets people like, so that's why it was done. Happy being in there because it's a H, creates context. But I like to land in terms where fitness fits into the experience for, how pleasure fits in. Again, to reiterate, taking a time consequence. And I use, remember the on my pillars of what I want for people at the end, and then reverse engineer back, like what should that global reasoning be for those experiences is to have, at that point in time, and I describe it in that age, you're 85 to 95 or whatever, and you have a great cognition, and then you're capable of doing anything physically you need to do at that time, right? That allows you to support all your physical endeavors, and everything you've done leading up to that allows you to do those things. And then lastly, this is where I changed tone on this exact language, and I classified it in more of a in two different words. And herein, maybe you can pull that apart too, so we could clarify this and upgrade it perhaps. But satisfaction and contentment. And I landed with those two words to be almost antithetical to the newest concept of happiness as being this big virtue we got to go after, right? Because I saw that, I saw the beauty in that in positive psychology in the 90s. And then you start working with a whole ton of people, and I was like, we're not happy. So is all this things leading to happiness? And again, of course, this ties into the hedonistic aspect and the happy, 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 happy. Yeah, I'm so depressed, And so, satisfaction and contentment is what I'd like to replace inside of there for this long-term goals that you should have of your fitness experience. And what I mean by that, to clarify, is that at the end of those days, and what should be your motivating factors every time you exercise, is that you want your fitness experience to allow you to have all these experiences, right? To allow experiences. Now, some are up, some are down, some are around and round, but there's a lot of satisfaction in the adjustments humans make, the adjustments and the adaptations that we make. How do we deal with COVID? How do we deal with relationship stuff? How do we deal with pain? How do we deal, like, there is enjoyment in you understanding over a long period of time that you are capable of these adjustments, and that is life. It's like being able to adjust to all of these adaptations that you need to adjust to. um, and I think there's a lot of satisfaction and contentment in that, and not happiness at the end. Yeah. So, um, any thoughts on the words that I chose for that on the back end to switch up the four H's or the?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a very good way to go, and I think that goes back to what we were discussing earlier, and the Greeks with the seven different, you know, words for love, and Aristotle's notion of eudaimonia, and how we define happiness today, where it is kind of this perpetual like, yay, smiley face. I have the big house and the cars and all the rest of this stuff. You know, the satisfaction fulfillment stuff highlights the fact that we're talking about something that is lasting, that is sustainable, that doesn't like feed on itself, that doesn't ultimately collapse in with you like lying in a ditch begging for that next fixed. You know what I mean? Like, hey
Yeah.
man, you got some metcons for me? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like that's and I think we all know the difference, right? We all know the difference between whatever someone's vice is, whether it's chocolate or
I just saw the memes just flying off the presses. Me lying in a ditch,
hey
screaming
man,
that out. Hey man, you got a Metcon for me?
just some Cindy, some Fran, something quick for time. Oh man.
That's good, brother. That's good.
Uh
Sorry.
oh no, I was just gonna say I don't know if you'd
Oh,
heard this from Georgia or Carl or whoever's in charge of it, but Brandon is taking over in OPEX's Instagram like sometime in late February. So I'm sure
oh,
they'll be
nice.
part of the
Oh, nice.
meme. But yeah, I think the wording there is important because when you think about satisfaction or fulfillment, you think of someone, sitting there and just content. It's not that jonesing for I need that extra next fix. It's like that was good. I enjoyed that. I'm gonna do that again the next day and the next day after that, and like it's good. It's
Yeah.
sustainable.
Yeah. As I was going back over the words there too, just to it's a little bit off in regards to our topic, but just explanation of that. The horny aspect is just a front end again H word in alliteration that kind of gets what, but we discussed that because number one, we like talking truths, but
Yeah.
also two, it kind of just discusses reproductive health as being like something that's obvious and observant and things that we want to have discussions on like and
Yeah.
it's a baseline thing that we do want to discuss, right? Now, it doesn't include conversations on lust, dating apps, etc., positions, whatever. But it does, we do, indirectly have that discussion. We start the front end conversation with it on things like vitality. That can lead into conversations on libido and awareness and conscious efforts around what that is. And then that can lead into like where that falls in line with your priorities and your fitness experience, etc to get to the point with them recognizing that fitness has to be a supporting mechanism to allow what we'll call great reproductive health. And reproductive health is not just like from 12 to 18, it's for females having consistent great cycles and for males having vitality to be able to do whatever they want to do, right? So that's what the horny aspect comes into it. Hunger, which I would say have really thought about that in multiple different ways over a long period of time here. But that talks about the as well the natural requirements that we have to source information on this planet that goes into us that allows us to navigate this thing really effectively, like really effectively to adapt to all different kinds of things, right? And I was very short on that language, but whatever the land gives us and we put in here, we have to continually do it and do it at a rate that's, I would say, local to us and that works for us and allows us to physically operate, think cognitively, and lead to a real good life. So that's the hungry aspect, not like, oh, is hungry really important? It's like, no, it's a H, makes you think about food information, etc. And then the happy, healthy area I've already discussed, and maybe that needs an upgrade, but I'm also willing, if it's not willing, but interested in our listeners to come up with a couple other H's and we can just as I said, knock this motherfucker out of the park with alliteration, with some other cool H's.
Yeah, and I think it totally depends maybe on the perspective with which you're, viewing the words. Like when I initially heard that set of phrases like, coming from FDN land and things like that, it struck me that you were talking about like you were saying with libido, like there's obviously ways in which libido can go like be way too excessive, and lust and hunger can be way too excessive in the form
Yeah.
of, gluttony and things like that.
Yeah.
But we're talking about those. I think the interesting connection here is between pleasure and like the virtuous aspects of those things. Like
Yeah.
it is very common today to have low libido. That
Yeah.
is not normal from a biological perspective.
Yes.
People having excess hunger or insufficient hunger.
Yes.
I'm just talking about the relationship between proper pleasure and biology. And because the
Mhm.
environment has switched so much today, our pleasure switches have kind of gone
Yeah.
screwy, either to the point
Yeah.
where it's too much or too little.
Yeah. And I would even say that it's overcorrected to the point of we've moved past even the conversation on awareness of said points, right? But more into like some moral concepts as to where that should be. I think it's gone even overcorrected to that point. That's just from my perspective too, of where the conversation on libido, as an example, there's been a lot more conversation deeply embedded in terms of what that means to your own moral base support, right, and ethics around those thoughts. And I'm like, man, what just happened to the conversation of us saying, do you think it's supposed to go down? Should you feel like that for 15 years? Like, I don't give a shit what it means to you, but what's your thoughts? Let me know. And no one wants to like have that kind of, let's call it a 1999 2005 conversation on it. We're kind of just like, ooh, well, anyways, it just goes in the overcorrected pattern. And the other H is just for smartasses who are trying to throw some in. It can't be histamine and hemoglobin and hyaluronic acid. I know smartasses will throw in those H's as example, or HIT.
It's got to be something that I think all the H's we have in there thus far, like 99% of the population who speaks English can understand.
Yeah,
So it
yeah,
can't be something that wouldn't immediately be understood somewhat.
yeah, yeah. Or a vegetable that we can start a sponsorship with, right? That starts
Right.
with H. This is a question, is there a vegetable that starts with the letter H? Mm,
Horseradish is that a
yeah,
vegetable?
for
Is that
sure. Yeah, yeah. That's, oh well, I don't even know. It's
or
classified. That's
spice, or I
I
don't
don't
know.
know. Anyways, that's good. That's it.
Um, see if they
Have
sponsored
you
by horseradish.
horseradish? Sorry, broccoli.
Sorry, yeah, we're gonna switch you up this week. So we've talked about pleasure in its relation to fitness and biology. I thought another interesting question would be, and we've talked about this a little bit in previous episodes, but now with respect to pleasure in particular, that distinction between biology and culture.
Mm,
So the happy, horny, hungry, healthy, like that really relates to notions of biology that far precede any development of agriculture and societies and books and philosophy and all the rest of that stuff. But now we have culture. Now we have 10,000 years worth of culture, and as you sometimes put it, points and prizes are means of deriving pleasure,
mhm.
especially in fitness. So just I don't know if you have any thoughts there. We're now going beyond the biology. We're now
Yeah.
going beyond the biology. I mean, there's a certain element of biology and group cohesion and things like that, but thoughts there on pleasure and its relation to fitness.
Yeah, well, I think it's a huge one, so I'm not even actually really sure where to start on it, but I just think that it I don't know if I'm right in saying this, but it's upstream from biology now. It's like it's what we have to take into consideration. Like I say all the time, people come in front of us, no one sees this thing the way you do, right? So you may have heard this here, you may have read these things, but when they come in front of you, and that's a human looking for some different reason and all different types of reasons as to why they want to experience this fitness experience, you got to recognize that's first and foremost. They got there through culture that brought them to this point of this, let's call it, physical fitness experience. And yeah, so I think that's all I would say, is that it's probably embedded as a concept of culture is upstream from biology in the fitness experience. And I guess the rewriting of all that is the opposite way around. Like, you eventually make people recognize over time that what you do in the fitness experience is a social construct, that we just put together to allow you to move, to allow you to move with, um, I just read your earlier words earlier, which I kind of smirked at when you said frivolous amusement. I'm going to connect that to a bunch of different future podcasts. Folly and frivolous amusement, that that will get you to all those things that I talked about. So that's what I think about when you say where culture fits into that for today.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's interesting historically how, I mean, fitness was, for the vast majority of human history, a purely biological phenomena.
Yes. Yes.
And it has increasingly become, I mean, there's still obviously those biological aspects and people wanting to get up off the floor and,
Yeah.
different things like that. But it,
Yeah.
it really has become, in many ways, a predominantly cultural phenomena that's dominated by, like, am I in the orange zone? And what did I put up on the whiteboard? And,
Yeah.
you know, those
Yeah.
different motivating factors that are very often divorced from optimal health and longevity and
Oh, for
biology.
sure.
And
For
yeah,
sure. It's I spoke with the other day with Jonathan Stewart on a podcast. It truly is just unconscious, and there's no judgment around it. It's just like, I don't know why. I don't know why I'm following that orange thing and why I'm doing that, right? And this is the interesting point, which this book right there, it's called Exercised, ED, by Daniel Lieberman. He says that he goes around the globe and talks to people, is like, what do you do for training? And they're like, training? you know so he was capable of meeting with these groups of people that give us some insight to what it was like 500 years ago or 2000 years ago, right? Is like, fitness, I don't know, dude. I just got to walk that far to get water to bring it back, and then I got to go do these things in order to gather this food in order to feed my children. Like, I don't know what you're talking about in regards to exercise or training. So even that fact and all the shit you can pull from that, which he does eloquently, makes us realize that it really is a cultural phenomenon. And what we are doing, well, I'm going to say what I am doing, I guess, is, and ironically, I have a biology minor, and this is probably why I really liked it, was that I just saw some of these what I perceived as be these pieces of truth that give us some sense of reality. And I think that's what was in place for a long period of time, that people didn't even know that, right? It's like, um, why do I have to run with you to chase this animal? It's like, well, you don't want to eat, then you don't have to. But if you want to eat, you're going to have to fucking chase this thing down. This is how you do it, and this is how you honor it and clean it, and this is how you're going to have to bring it back. This is the physical, no, go this way, grab the hoofs and walk like this, and then we figured out, cut a leg and put over your shoulder, you wrap this thing and stuff it in, all of that is like today's, like, pulleys and doing my leg press. Why? Gonna eat my elk steak at lunch that gets dropped from an Amazon drone, perfectly prepared. So yeah, here's where we are, right? This is where we are. Which, again, I'll bring it back. This is why we need to have the zombie opportunity that needs to be hypothesized as an option for the future. Like, we have to not be freaked out by making that idea, but why not just, like, create a myth and a story that they're gonna come, and you've got to train to be prepared for all the things like mental acuity and distance, because, as I said, after 3 minutes they just, like, fall apart. And this because that when they have cells as zombies, where as when they reach levels of glycolysis, they've only been eating other humans, so they get no sugar. So this is a beautiful little reason as to why they can't, right? Because they're classic keto and they can't handle glycolysis.
Oh man, we thought carnivore was extreme. Now this is like human keto.
There, I said it. Well, what zombies not eating? Zombies not like thinking. They're all like gathering in the frickin' backyard. I wonder if this is like turning these into short chain fatty acids through my gut and leading to. I wonder if this fiber is having this impact on my the microflora of my children. You know, I don't think they're having that conversation.
You got the bulletproof human coffee and the,
Yeah, I don't think they're
like,
vibration plate. You see any humans? No, okay, I'm back to this. I'm so parasympathetic right now.
it's funny that you mentioned that, A, because we discussed Chalmers today, but also because the video clip on Instagram is from the one of the dogmatism episodes where you and I were joking about how like we're gonna need our ring muscle ups to get us away from the zombies and GHD bench presses to push them off of us.
You could be over a ledge.
Yeah.
Right? You could be where you're like, no, no, don't push me down. And the zombie's looking at you like, yeah, you're going down. Instead of eating you, he knows you're going to get a lot of plane if he pushes you off, but he's sitting on your feet. So in that place, you're like, he doesn't know that I did 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, bench press 135 off the GHD bench and run, right? Because lo and behold, it's needed. And you go, boom, and he falls over and you catch yourself and survive. And then you, because of your running prowess, you run away and he doesn't get you. And it's all because of the 50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
It was that transition work at the L1 seminar that saved me, that allowed me to
This,
pull
death,
up.
death, life,
There's
death,
someone
life.
there's someone looking over at another cliff away from you. You had the ring muscle up experience and you survive, and the other one just plummets to his death. He's like, shit, I should have gone to that L1.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You know, you go in just this whole new territory of human capabilities with the transition. And the teaching of the transition is like, you know, meta coach.
Maybe we should dedicate one of these episodes to like the exact details of the zombie apocalypse and what we should tell people to to motivate them.
I mean, we got to come up with ways to make this more exciting. You know,
Yep.
we got to come up with ways to tie people into some reasoning behind it. You know, next thing you know, it's a religion.
Yep. Starts out as sincere questioning.
Conch.
Dogmatism street. Here we go. One question I thought of and had while you were saying what you were saying about exercise and him running around and asking people about what they do for fitness. I wonder, I'm just curious. I've just been thinking about it. I think I have some idea of what the reason might be, but I wonder why sociologically in 20th century North America, I mean, because that's really CrossFit, Orange Theory, barbell culture, like that's where this came from. Like it you know, there's history and strong men in different places and cultures, but it's interesting and curious. Why did this arise in 20th century North America? Now, part of it's obviously obesity and wanting to counteract that, but I don't know if you've ever read anything on that or if you have any thoughts on that, why this phenomena arose culturally here.
Yeah, I think it was probably the embedded idea of a new world and a new world and doing things slightly differently, with this nuances of freedom. And you have a free society in this new world perspective of doing things. And then, as the way things go and the opportunities that we find here on the land or the ideas that you come in with on that, it fast forwards to a point, I think, where we have the option and availability of a whole bunch of shit around us to consume and use because we can. And inside of all that, with the timing of industry and technology and automation around food sourcing, it just led to, an opportunity to feed us all, at at a rate that that wasn't really, perfect. Or sorry, not a rate, but as a kind that wasn't really perfect. And then that just leads to so many things down the road in terms of the efficiencies in the food that led to just a lessening quality of it. And that's not a front end back end, but that was just at the same time as we recognize that with the advent of the wheel and machines and et cetera, we could move across land, i.e. adapt. We could do things that we needed to do without movement, i.e. adapt, be agile and become these more higher conscious humans, at the same time as this whole big social push for cognition was big. Intelligence, education, learn these things, all based upon those previous New World free, consumption concepts. And it lands us here, right? Where it's just like majority of individuals have access to so many different things. And this is, where I don't argue Pinker's data on perceptions of what is better today and where we are, et cetera. But, it has to be stretched out, obviously, because the story inside there, we live longer, but are we really more vital and more healthy? And there's so much data to show that we're not, and we're not moving towards that. So I think it's those areas where the last one, the big cognition push and physicality due to we're adapting, became less and less. So intervening factors of wherever the argument wants to go on food sourcing and capabilities, combined with a less of a requirement to actually move. And that's what, and a big push on social perspective and cognition. And you get, what you get is people on Twitter for 8 hours and they're not exercising. That's what you get.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot to that. It's just it's interesting to me sociologically that, like, it wasn't Italy, it wasn't France. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it is to a certain extent there, and there was kettlebell culture in Russia and the
Mm-hmm.
Highland Games, and
Yeah.
Scotland and Ireland and stuff like that. And but just interesting that so much of today of what we talk about with relation to fitness and all its different permutations was born out of really 20th and 21st century North America.
Yeah, well, that's why I called it New World and these concepts of freedom. That doesn't mean there's all kinds of awesome virtues inside of that. You know what it ends up being? Folly and frivolous amusement. So it looks like, oh, we're ahead and we're adapting and we've been doing this for 30 years. It's like, yeah, how is that doing for you? How is that doing for you? So what you're saying is you've quickly adapted seemingly faster than everyone else. Oh yeah, yeah. How's that doing for you? It's not working too well. So it looks like this unbelievable expansion of ideas and innovation and thought and new concepts of democracy and economy. And in the end, what does it come down to in regards to biology? It's not much better. It's not much better. So we're in this weird time of like, well, we don't need to actually do it, which is always my point, right? No, we don't need to do it, but we need to have conversation as to why we should do it. Yeah, that's what we need to have.
You should write a counterpoint to Pinker's book that is like ... health and fitness. And then
Yeah,
it's like,
right,
whoop, it's going in the exact opposite direction
right. Yeah, yeah,
historically.
yeah. Because I mean, there's strong data in there on global poverty and global accessibility to rights and freedoms. So
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So what do you think there for pleasure? Any other thoughts or?
No, that was no. I think it's good. I think the cliche comment. I think we just it's not the tip of the iceberg, really, for what could be discussed inside of that. Because I think even the angle of maybe a bigger, I guess not philosophical, but a physiological conversation on, compensatory models of behavior and physiology, right? Which come from pleasure seeking. I mean, that's a whole conversation in itself, So I think there's probably these subsets underneath this little iceberg moment of pleasure inside of fitness, but it's good that we touched a tiny bit of it just to make people aware of the language and your physiological framework or philosophical framework for the definitions. So we're
Yeah,
good.
agreed. And as we've talked about many other episodes, I'm more than happy to, we'll come back to, and, we can
Yeah.
do subtopics on this and
Yeah. Wind
all
it a
sorts of
new
stuff.
way. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we got a call out to find some new H's. In Newfoundland is known as H's, where it would be appy, orny, hungry, healthy. You wouldn't even pronounce the H on the front end. So if you come up with any, then shoot us our way.
Yeah. Hit us up.
Hit us up. Subscribe, like.
Smash that like button. Smash that like button.
Smash that like button. Is that what the marketers do today?
That's what the
Do
kids are
it
saying these days.
now. Okay.
Yeah.
It would be higher order if you actually put your finger towards where it would actually occur on the YouTube video. Like right here, folks, right here, hit
Yeah.
here, right now, hit here, So
They make a augmented reality button and then they just boom, 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 boom.
yeah, feel it. Can you feel the pleasure in that?
Oh man.
Thank you
How's the
so
next
much.
generation going to make it with YouTube and all the rest of the stuff?
What's that?
How's the next generation going to make it with YouTube and TikTok and growing up on that?
They'll know everything.
Yeah. Or their dopamine receptors will be so burnt out.
Yeah, they want to know nothing.
Yes.
It's not possible. It's not possible at age 27 to like have a get up and go. It's like, what do you think about that?
Yeah.
It's nothing like those videos I saw when I was 18. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What are those experiences, right? Yeah. Maybe fitness will be the fix. How? Maybe there'll be a zombie revolution. Maybe there won't.
But maybe there will.
Maybe there will. All right, Robbie.
All right.
Thanks, buddy. Ooh, just a second. Wait, no. Nope. Don't want to do that. Don't want to do that.